park location map, this is actually going to be really similar to what you submit with PARTIF. The really key part here is to make sure that you have your information correct, because this is going to be one part of what we use to determine to make sure that what you're submitting is an existing LWCF site. Please use the resources that we've done to give us that. We've tried to go through here recently and as best we can update the names of the parks to what they actually are on the ground. You may find when you're looking at the sheet, there's some really dated names on your parks. That's because a lot of the grant files that we have are 30, 40, 50 years old. Maybe past directors in your area haven't told us of the name change at your park site. So it used to be called the Green Tree Park in the 1930s or 1950s and 60s and 70s, and now you've switched it to something something Memorial Park. We're going to only have the old name. You can certainly let us know what the name change is, and we're going to try and make a note of it. A name change does not mean that it is a conversion. It just means that we don't know what you've been calling it. A name change of your park is not a compliance issue. So just make sure that if you don't see your park listed on there, but you swear that you have one, it may mean that the name that we have isn't associated with the current working name of that park. We would like to update that, but it's not a compliance issue. Any questions about that? All right, next up. So to some extent, a good thing is, in looking at your project site plans and maps, we've tried to similarly have PARTIF. This is a case to where PARTIF kind of modeled some similarities to what LWCF is looking for a 6F map. You're going to see a lot of the parks, especially if you're familiar with PARTIF, you're used to seeing a red line kind of denoting the outside of the park. When you're looking at your LWCF park, look for that red line. That's your 6F boundary. And if your boundary of the map that you're looking at does not represent what your current park looks like, if part of it is shaved off, that's a good indication that you might have a conversion. You're going to have 6F acreage on there. Some of you are going to have parks from the 1960s and 70s. MPS, even though the grant started in 1965, 6F boundaries and deed restrictions did not take place until the early 1970s, mid-1970s. So we're going to have parks that don't have an official 6F boundary. And some of these projects that come forward, you're going to, by your project, define what the first 6F boundary for your park site is. These are going to be not easy to deal with. We're going to have to handle them on a case-by-case basis. But if you have a park and your 6F boundary is like all over the place and it's from the 1970s or 60s, there's a good chance we're going to have to work with you to determine what that 6F boundary is. It does not make you ineligible because you have a really, really, really old map. Trust me, there's plenty of them. So the core thing is make sure that the acreage on there, we're going to be double checking that the acreage that you're submitting lines up with what we have on the national, in our files. That is going to be one element of a compliance check. And like we said, you have to, if you're going to renovate something, list it on here using the color code that's listed down here. That's very similar to PARTIF. What we had talked about before is, and this is a little bit different than PARTIF, if you're submitting a land acquisition grant, you have to tell us what you're going to develop out there in the next 3 years. So you have to give us a conceptual map. The National Park Service wants to know what you're going to develop. You can't just acquire property and say we're going to put park stuff out there. You have to say we're going to acquire this park and we think we're going to do X, Y, Z out there and submit a map that has that. Now you can change it. You're not going to be bound to whatever it is that you put on this conceptual plan to say we're going to acquire 15 acres and we're going to develop a ball field and playground. Well, 2 years from now that may shift to something else. That's fine, but right now you have to submit something as best you know as to what you're going to plan to develop out there. This is also the place for, if you're doing acquisitions, to note pre-existing conditions. Tell us there is a guide wire that cuts right down the middle of the park. We can't have you. you're denoting a pre-existing condition. You can't help it, that's what's there, and it really helps you in the long run to denote it. Same thing, let's say this is a blank park site, you want to have your office building there, and it's going to have a massive footprint. Tell us about that. It's supporting outdoor rec, it's not going to be an issue, especially if it's pre-existing, we just need to know about it. Or if you're going to plan to put something indoor out there on the park site in the future, this is the map where you need to show that. And as best you can, like I said, overestimate. If you're doing a land acquisition, overestimate how much land you're going to need for indoor facilities in the future, because you're going to be bound to this forever. All right, so let's see. Kind of glossed over this. It's any park element any land that you acquire with with LWCF funds is dedicated in perpetuity for being a park site. I think we've said that. LWCF, any facility that you develop with LWCF funds is dedicated in perpetuity to be a park amenity. That is different than Part F. You do not have a 25-year window where you don't have to take care of this anymore. That's a core reason why we're doing this. Is the National Park Service expects that there is a park amenity out there forever. They do understand that it's going to have to shift over time. I do want to point to the example where I showed here that if you had, if you're acquiring new property, that expands your boundary. If you have, even though, let's say that you have 100-acre site and you're going to add 2 new LWCF acres of park out here, similar to the facility, the National Park Service is going to want you to have the entire park boundary, even if the other 100 acres were not acquired with LWCF funds. If you put LWCF money in their project, expect that the National Park Service is going to want anything that is park related adjacent to it added to the success boundary. So be very mindful as to whether or not you want LWCF money to go in for a small acquisition that's going to pull all the rest of the adjacent, maybe even Part F assisted facilities onto the park site. Part F has a similar acquisition restriction, so it's going to be less of an issue with that. But if you have paid for a property out of your own local money and then you want to add to it, know that all that past land is going to be added in also.